Welcome to a new episode of InFocus with Ejaz Haider. This program is supported by the Center for Security, Strategy and Policy Research. CESPR is an autonomous policy research center housed in the University of Lahore, and it tackles issues that impact contemporary security and strategic developments. This program is part of that effort. A decade-long project that began in 2015 and saw Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates as coalition partners against the onslaught by Iran-backed Ansarul Islam group, popularly known as Houthis, unraveled in literally 24 hours. That said, the interests and objectives of Riyadh and Abu Dhabi had begun to deviate much earlier. Abu Dhabi got down to sabotaging Yemen's political Islamist party, Islah, which has strong ties to UAE's Beit Nawa'ah, the Muslim Brotherhood, and whose leaders are part of Yemen's internationally recognized government. Further, the UAE also eyed expanding its strategic interests in ports and maritime routes across the Gulf of Aden, the Indian Ocean, and the Red Sea. UAE troops training and weaponry was central to breaking the Houthi siege of Aden in the early months of the war. Many of the senior local fighters in that battle were also veterans of Yemen's previous civil war between North and South back in 94. The 2015 battle in South Yemen also reinforced long-held ambitions for the revival of a separate southern state that existed for 23 years between Britain's departure from Aden in 1967 and unification with the North in 1990. The UAE leveraged the secessionists, underwriting the establishment of the Southern Transition Council, led by Idrus al-Zubaydi, and this was back in 2017. Yemen is not the only state the UAE has been trying to engineer in its favor. Its patronage extends to groups in Libya, Syria, and the Sudan. In Sudan, it has been supporting the genocidal campaign by the Rapid Support Force against government forces, which incidentally are supported by Riyadh. Apparently, the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman also raised the Sudanese civil war with US President Donald Trump during his visit to Washington in November, which is last year. And observers believe that this appears to have antagonized his former mentor, the ruler of the UAE, Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan. In any case, 2 weeks after MBS's US visit, the STC launched its eastward campaign, moving east from Aden and taking over Hadramaut and Al-Mara governorates in Yemen. That got the Saudis into action. But Yemen is not the only place where the UAE has suffered a setback. Somalia's government has cancelled all agreements with the UAE, including those for strategic ports like Berbera, Bosaso, and Kismayo. And they basically cited evidence that the UAE has sought to undermine Somalia's sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity, especially concerning Somaliland's recognition by Israel and alleged unauthorized airspace use for separatist leaders. A further setback to UAE has come with statements by Egypt and Oman that they back the Saudi position on Sudan and the Riyadh-backed dialogue on Yemen. The story is long with its twists and turns, so let me get to the chase and introduce my guest, which is Ambassador Matthew Bryza, a former US diplomat. His career included assignments as ambassador to Azerbaijan, Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, and Director on the National Security Council staff at the White House for Turkey, Cyprus, Greece, Central Asia, and the South Caucasus. He was also the US mediator of the Nagorno Karabakh, Abkhazia, South Ossetia, and Cyprus conflicts, and Deputy Advisor to the President and Secretary of State on Caspian Basin energy diplomacy. And as the Cold War was ending, Ambassador Bryza was a political officer in the US missions to Poland and to Russia. But interestingly, and which is not the only reason, but one of the reasons he's here, Ambassador Bryza was advising the Southern Transition Council. So thank you so much, Matthew, for being on this episode. Let's begin with a simple question.
Sure.
If you were advising the STC, do you think that they bit more than they could chew? Do you think the UAE kind of overplayed its hand? What exactly happened?
Yeah, and thank you, Mr. Haidar, for having me with you. I always love our conversations because your questions really make me think, and I come away knowing more than when I join the conversation. Thanks to you, and Happy New Year. And I'm sorry for the sun.
To you too, and and I'm grateful for these very kind words.
Yeah, thank you. They're just the truth, and I think it's indisputably clear that the STC did bite off more than it could chew. Um, Whether or not it was being urged by UAE to go through all of Hadramaut and all the way through Al Makhra and essentially gain control of all of the areas of Yemen not under Houthi control, I don't know. I'm an advisor, but I don't know. I don't have any. There's no transparency on the discussions between UAE officials and STC, but definitely the STC bought off more than it could chew, or bit off more than it could chew. I think the UAE did as well. I mean, I think the UAE was shocked when the Saudis attacked or bombed those armored personnel carriers and other weapons that were coming off the ship in Mukalla, were already, in fact, on shore. And UAE, I think, thought it was calling Saudi Arabia's bluff. Let's think back to the anti-Houthi war back, after 2014. It was, as we know, the coalition of UAE and Saudi Arabia primarily that were fighting with the STC and other militias in the south against the Houthis. And at that time, Saudi Arabia didn't really have ground forces that it was contributing. It was attacking from the air, and it was the UAE that had the ground forces. So friends and colleagues of mine from the US military, even after the Saudis bombed the armored personnel carriers, et cetera, armored vehicles in Mukalla, were saying, but it doesn't really matter because the Saudis don't have any ground forces and STC is much stronger. And that was clearly untrue. Totally untrue. But it's far from over too. I know we'll talk about that in a moment, but I think the Saudis may now be biting off more than they can chew by trying to remove the STC from the equation entirely.
Yeah. It's interesting because you said that there's not really much daylight between, how the issues happen on the ground with reference to STC and the UAE. But Idrus al-Zubadi, as we know, is part of the 8-member presidential council. And it seems that, I don't know, whether you were talking to him at some point, since you were advising the STC, or how you would have wanted the STC to actually approach this issue of kind of creating a unity government. But my own senses, and I am at a distance, and I don't keep an eye on Yemen constantly or consistently, but it seems to me that the secessionist sentiment, if you will, among the supporters of the STC probably got the better of al-Zubadi's judgment. And he thought that if he has the forces, and there was one clip by an STC fighter on social media where he said that we went in with great equipment and we had the support and all of the rest, and we returned on buses.
Wow.
This is one of the clips by an STC fighter on social media. So I just want to get a sense of what possibly would have motivated al-Zubadi to do what he did, and how much of it could possibly be with the backing of Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, your mention, Mr. Haider, of the troops returning from the front in buses reminds me of the experience I had in August 2008 in the middle of Russia's invasion of Georgia. And as I was driving from our fortified embassy back to my hotel after there was a lull in fighting, same thing I encountered. There were hundreds of buses, and then Georgian troops, I was watching them get off the buses, just completely dazed and demoralized and not knowing where to go or what to do. So that's a powerful image that you just conveyed. So I've had plenty of meetings with Mr. Zubaidi, but not during this crisis period, not in December. But I have assumed that what you mentioned in your introduction is what happened, which is that the UAE was angry when Mohammed bin Salman, Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, complained about the UAE in Sudan to President Trump in the Oval Office. And I don't know this, but there's a lot of, and I'm sure you've heard, there are rumors about it, and it seems plausible to me, but I don't know it. It seems plausible that Abu Dhabi would have said, okay, again, we are the ones with the ground forces. The Saudis just have air power. Air power is never, the decisive element of warfare, except if you drop 2 atomic bombs, as the United States did on Japan, but that's a different story. And so I think UAE certainly wasn't against what Zubaydi did at the least. And it sounds plausible that maybe UAE thought, okay, STC, now's your time. I would also like to add, in terms of my own advice, I mean, I never advised them to, fight a war, but I was advising that STC is the most capable political military organization in the South. And the PLC, the Presidential Leadership Council, was dysfunctional. It was governance by committee, as you said, an 8-member committee. In the history of decision making, the best decisions have never come out of a committee, no matter how many members are on it. And so we had been advising and encouraging and helping the STC strategize on how to consolidate authority, not a coup, not take over the PLC, but consolidate authority. And so this operation, had it been successful, certainly would have done that. And the bottom line is, as we said in the very beginning, now STC is in a position where it did overplay its hand, and so certainly there's no sign, to put it bluntly, that the UAE was against them doing that. And it seems to be the UAE has relied on groupings, you can call them secessionist or whatever they are. I mean, from the STC's perspective, they're not secessionists. They're trying to consolidate authority in the South and, yes, resurrect the state of southern Yemen after the unification experiment failed. But let's call them secessionists. UAE, as you said in the opening, also works with a number of them in Libya, in Sudan, although the Sudanese Armed Forces, the SAF, it launched a coup together with the RSF, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Burhan and Hemeti did it together to overthrow the democratically elected government of Sudan. Nonetheless, UAE is a small country. It's got 1 million citizens, and it wants to play a big geopolitical role, and it has interest in ports and choke points, and so on both sides of the Bab el-Mandab Strait. It's been working with separatist groupings to subcontract out a lot of its security interests, and I think that's what happened in Yemen.
Yeah, the UAE. I think it was James Mattis called them Little Sparta. Now, I mean, Spartans, as we know, were Spartans. Not really into glitzy skyscrapers and a lot of wealth. But I think the UAE took that kind of seriously. And what they've been doing, from all available evidence, given the fact that they're very small, they have a very small population, to use mercenaries. They've been using Eric Prince's mercenaries. They've been using ex-Colombian special forces operatives. They had the Sudanese RSF mercenaries fighting in Yemen. And they have been batting, again, by all available evidence, they've been batting for their own interests also, but also for the Israelis. I mean, this whole Somaliland thing, and the fact that they never condemned it. Egypt did, Saudi Arabia did, and the rest of it. We also know that they are very close to the Israelis, as are the Bahrainis. So a lot of this kind of dovetails in a way that has basically meant that governments and populations in the greater Middle East are not particularly comfortable with UAE's interests and positions, including the fact, as I said, they were trying to sabotage Islam because they have this beef against the Muslim Brotherhood, which is where their Egyptian equities had come in, with reference to Morsi and all that. So I just want to go back to what you said about, which is a very interesting observation, with reference to the Saudis might have bitten off more than they can chew. We are hearing that the delegation of the STC that actually went to Riyadh was held incommunicado. They were under pressure. And some of the STC leaders that stayed in Aden did not go with the delegation or not part of the delegation have also come on the record saying that this entire thing has been, this whole idea of the dissolution and the rest of it, the statement has been written by the Saudis, not by the STC. Idrus, as we know, went on a boat to Somaliland and then was airlifted by Abu Dhabi to the UAE. So when you say that the Saudis might have bitten off more than they can chew, what exactly are you pointing at? I mean, the fact that the sentiment for having a state of South Arabia among the population, is that something which is going to keep this alive? Will the supporters of the state of Saudi Arabia look at this delegation that will return from Riyadh as traitors? I mean, what's going on?
Yeah, great questions. And I had the same information. I was supposed to be flying to Riyadh that same night to advise. And I decided not to get on the flight. Well, in consultation with my colleagues and client. So it was clear something was up. And yeah, that those members of the delegation, it's been widely reported, were and are detained in Riyadh. And the New York Times reported, I think it was, it doesn't matter when they reported it, but that last Thursday, one member of the delegation made the only phone call anyone did back to their families, and he just said, "I'm okay." And that's it. And I think Zubaydi figured that he was going to, he was worried that he'd get arrested too. Now, of course, he would have been arrested had he gone. So he fled, but then returned to UAE. So he lived to fight another day. Now, I don't know, none of us on the outside know what the internal dynamic is like between those in the STC who went to Riyadh and issued that statement clearly under duress, versus the leadership that's left in Abu Dhabi, versus the other rank and file members of the STC out in Aden. But we do know that in Aden and elsewhere, there have been hundreds of thousands of people organically protesting, right, for the South Arabia and in favor of the STC. I know from the folks I advise that they're not giving up in Abu Dhabi, and even though Mr. Zubaydi fled his troops in the field, I would guess a lot of them realized he had no choice and hope for his return, though I don't know. I have had no contact with him. So when I said that the Saudis may have bitten off more than they can chew, I had in mind that UAE and Saudi Arabia recognized the Houthi threat. They fought a war without, it was successful enough to get the Houthis out of Aden and back further north. But the Houthis still control, let's say, the north. It's northwestern Yemen, of course, but let's say the north. There's no prospect for them to leave. They continue threatening freedom of navigation in the Red Sea. And as the Trump administration said, both during Signalgate and then in the national security strategy, and then Ambassador Boulos, President Trump's Middle East envoy, also had a message 3 days ago saying, we have no interest in the internal politics of Yemen. All we care about is security, meaning fighting the Houthis and other terrorists and maintaining freedom of navigation. So if you don't have the STC to do it, because Saudi Arabia and UAE already failed in their war, right? So if you don't have the STC there as the most capable organization politically and militarily, and there's all this strong sentiment in southern Yemen for a South Arabia that would be led by Mr. Zubaydi and the STC, and if there's inside the STC still this chance or likelihood that those troops still out in the field of the STC are waiting for Zubaydi to come back, and he does, wow. And if the Saudi plan is to have somebody from the north be, and somebody who lives in Saudi Arabia, like Mr. Alimi, be the political leader of the south, and then you want to take on the Houthis, it seems impossible. So if you take all of those prospects of the STC out of the equation, you're left with nobody to consolidate the South, nobody to govern it, nobody to organize it. And that then can lead to, I think, severe instability that will be contrary to Saudi Arabia's interests.
Yes, that is the most likely scenario. But you see, from where I stand, I look at this rupture, if you will, between the UAE and Saudi Arabia as constituting structural issues here.
Mm.
And so whenever you have those structural impediments and constraints, then getting back to that starting line becomes that much more difficult.
Yeah.
And Yemen is not just about Yemen. Yemen is about these sea routes, the Red Sea, or the ports, and also the regional rivalry that goes, much beyond Yemen.
Yeah.
Sudan, into Libya, elsewhere, Somaliland, Somalia, Ethiopia. So I think the likely scenario is that at some point, you might have some kind of guerrilla warfare or some such thing. If Zubaydi comes back to Yemen. But there is also another likely scenario, because strategy makes strange bedfellows. And that could be the Saudis, who we already know that since 2023 have been basically soft on Ansarul Islam, because Beijing got Saudi Arabia and Iran to shake hands. That if the STC fighters become an actual threat at some point, for the Saudis to actually link up with Ansarul Islam to try and put them down. Because one thing is very clear, the Houthis don't want a divided Yemen, the Saudis don't want a divided Yemen, the Omanis don't want a divided Yemen, the Egyptians don't want a divided Yemen. So that is where their interests converge. What do you think of that?
I think you're right. And I think there's one more element that marks a sharp difference between Saudi Arabia. There's two between Saudi Arabia and UAE. One is the obvious one. The UAE wants to produce as much oil as possible. Saudi Arabia has been trying to manage OPEC. But the other one is political Islam. With UAE just fiercely against it. And Mohammed bin Salman, he understands the grave dangers of political Islam. And you mentioned Muslim Brotherhood. He's got his Salafis. But he's pragmatic. He's willing to work with them and al-Islah, as you mentioned before, if he feels it's needed or advantageous. So that's another big split. So I personally think they're going to end up coming to an accommodation eventually, Saudi Arabia and UAE. I mean, they have to. But in the short run, it can be rough going. So if they're going to come to an accommodation, I think it's not likely then that the Saudis are going to team up with the Houthis and with Iran. But you raise a good point. I wouldn't rule it out because of the agreement that Beijing brokered with both with Abu Dhabi and Tehran. So it's possible. But my sense has always been that the Saudi preference is the one that the U.S. government is talking about, which is, we want unity so that we can focus on the Houthi threat. But it doesn't mean Saudi Arabia will always think that way. But if Saudi Arabia were to partner with the Houthis and Iran, I think Donald Trump would really be upset for whatever that's worth. And so I think he would end up getting a vote in that decision.
No, I understand, because you see, it's interesting that obviously one of the issues that Trump would have, should I say the Trump administration, the United States would have with Saudis kind of linking up with the Houthis, is the Houthi position on Israel. And Trump, frankly, for all his talk about peace and Gaza and the rest of it, he is pretty naturally pro-Israel and a Zionist.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, very much.
Yeah. And I mean, his entire, if you look at his previous administration, look at this administration, and you can see it very clearly. He has his issues with Netanyahu, but, overall, he is on that side of the table with Israel. What Mike Pence said some 4 years ago, that we are not in the middle of the table. So one of the things that the Trump administration has done is to actually tell the world that we are on the side of the table where Israel sits.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, but having said that, if the Saudis sell this to Trump, that having Houthis on our side basically allows us to essentially, dilute their position in terms of how they're going to treat the sea traffic in the Red Sea. Uh, Whether that is structurally possible or ideologically possible, I don't know. My own sense is that it's probably not possible. But some kind of modus vivendi, if the STC becomes a problem, which frankly I think it will, and I'm sure you also think that way, that it is going to become a problem, and that this thing is not over.
It's a great question. If it were possible that the Houthis would agree to, become peaceful in partnership with Saudi Arabia, that would be something Trump would need to consider. But he still would have to weigh the point that the Israelis will always be against that. They will never believe it's possible. And it would also require Trump to overcome concern about the Houthi-Iran axis. But on top of that, I'd go back to something I said in the very beginning, which is that, or in my last intervention, that Trump has made clear he doesn't care at all about internal Yemeni developments. I think much to the US's and the world's disadvantage, I think he should, but he doesn't care. He cares about freedom of navigation. And it seems clear to me, as you were just suggesting, Mr. Haider, that the Houthis are gonna disrupt freedom of navigation as long as they can, when they feel they need to, that it can get them some advantage, or it helps them as well in their world to show their mettle, to show that they are strong, they're tough, they're fearless. So I don't think that such of an arrangement is possible. And clearly, as you said, I mean, Israel and UAE are much better aligned, which means alignment with the STC, than is Israel with Saudi Arabia. I could imagine, though, that President Trump and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, might hope that by brokering this sort of an arrangement between Saudi Arabia and the Houthis, that would help somehow eliminate the Houthi threat to Israel and then make the Saudi Arabia joining the Abraham Accords more possible. But I just don't think it's practical. I don't think it'll work.
I actually agree with you, because there's so many structural constraints in terms of the positions of various actors. I was just simply thinking about how it's going to play out if the STC does become a problem.
But there is another angle to this, though, that we just, how's it going to play out if the STC doesn't just go away? Saudis and President of the PLC, Alimi, have both said in the past week that they understand the southern cause, the issue of the future of southern Yemen, a possible southern Yemeni state, must be addressed, and of course through negotiations. So what I hope the outcome is going to be is that there is a negotiating process. Saudis want it to be in Riyadh. There's no way it's going to be in Riyadh. The STC has to be part of it, and the STC's delegation is detained there.
Yeah, but that is where the Saudis have done something which I personally think they should not do. Cut the STC loose, because you can't just wish them away. I mean, there is, and forget STC. We're talking about the demonstrations we have seen in Aden, with reference to the southern cause. Now, it's regardless of whether someone actually agrees with that cause or not. It's there. So let's get back to the possibility, or a probability, if you will, of Saudis and the Emiratis coming together. Do you think that they can manage to compartmentalize their rupture in terms of, okay, we've got a problem, that problem continues in the Sudan, we got a problem in Libya, that problem continues, blah, blah, blah. But as far as Yemen is concerned, let's sit down and work out something. Do you think that is possible? Because that's the only way that they can actually get together.
I do. And that's what I was saying a couple of minutes ago. I think that's the most likely outcome. They're going to find an accommodation with each other. But now, as you were saying, emotions are running really hot. the Saudis, I think, probably feel that the Emiratis tried to humiliate them with this big STC push. The Emiratis, as we were saying, are furious that Mohammed bin Salman was talking behind their back to President Trump, or reportedly doing so. But those sorts of emotions passed. And the two countries, I mean, UAE and Saudi Arabia, they fought together against the Houthis once. They still, no matter what kind of accommodation, or we used to joke, my colleagues and I, that the Saudi policy and that of the Biden administration in Yemen was de-escalation at all costs. That's still what the policy seems to be. But so that may be the policy now. When what that shows is Saudi Arabia doesn't want a protracted war that involves STC in Yemen. It does want a negotiated path. It just wants to control the negotiation. And as you said, you can't just wish away the sentiment and the existence of the STC, even if they, God forbid, were to execute all the STC leadership.
I agree with you. I mean, there's also the sense of MBSs, frankly, that, we the Saudis, we are the leaders. And, how come this little Sparta decides to act in ways as if they're the leaders? So I think there's a bit of the personal here also. But two final questions. One about what you said about the US not particularly interested in the internal Yemeni politics. I find that to be, from the American point of view, a bit problematic, because what happens internally in Yemen also has an impact on the open sea lanes of communication. So you can't want to have open sea lanes but not really be bothered about what's happening in Yemen, because what's happening in Yemen will necessarily impact whether the sea lanes remain open or whether they are constantly under attack.
Of course, I agree with you. But I think the Trump administration is drunken with success at the moment of Venezuela, seeing what really was, an unbelievable military intelligence operation, even if strategically it's hard to fathom why you would do this. Although the reason lies in
tactically, it was brilliant.
Incredible. And if they could do that there, they can do that forever in the Red Sea, they think. So that's one thing. But still, even if that's true, still the cost of doing that is so much higher ad infinitum, rather than just getting Yemen in a better place. And so the reason this happens is, in my experience, I worked for 4 years on the staff of the National Security Council under President George W. Bush. And so I was in the middle of a wonderful system that, that organization often comes up with the strategic concepts that are aimed to reflect the vision of the president. But what it really does as well is coordinates and make sure every agency that has equity in an issue has a seat at the table and can argue, can make its point, and then try to forge a consensus. So there's a whole system, and there are meetings at level 1, then level 2, then level 3, then level 4. And if the policy isn't decided at any one of those 4 levels, then the president has to take his own decision. So it's systematic, and he killed it. President Trump has killed that system. It does not exist anymore. So the decisions are taken in a very, very small group, and you know who it is. It's Secretary of State, National Security Advisor Marco Rubio, it's Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller, it's Chief of Staff Susie Wiles. Sometimes Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth is involved, but not always. And then some for economic issues, it's Secretary of Treasury Scott Bessent. Other than that, there's nobody involved really in the process. So you can come up with an idea that doesn't make sense, and nobody's there, like in my day on the National Security Council staff, to say, wait, that doesn't make sense. Let's fix this, and then send the decision to the president fixed.
Yeah, well, since you talked about Stephen Miller, I would add another name to it, Katie Miller. Katie Miller. So if she can put the Greenland map on social media in the way that she did, then what can one say? But final question, I want you to put your sort of U.S. former diplomat hat.
Yeah.
And because we're talking Yemen, there's a big elephant in the room here, which is what's happening in Iran and what President Trump has been saying. Because we've been talking about how to sort of put things together in Yemen. But in the event that President Trump actually makes good on his verbal threats, And let's for a moment assume that this is not just part of his opening price in a bargain,
Yeah.
and that he's actually going to go through with this. All hell's going to break loose. And then Yemen will just be a small fraction of what we're talking about in the Middle East.
Completely agree. I mean, Iran is a complex country, right? The Persians are the biggest ethnic group, but there are so many others, and not, you know, Azerbaijanis, right? They're about 20% of the population, and the supreme leader and President Pezeshkian are Azerbaijanis. And, you know, northern Azerbaijan was restive when I was ambassador. I mean, southern Azerbaijan, but northern Iran was restive. There were big protests in Tabriz about water shortages in Lake Urmia. That is a constantly sort of simmering, I don't want to say separatism, but there's a movement for some sort of greater autonomy. But there's so many other ethnic groupings in Iran.
You got the Ahwazi Arabs, you got the Baloch,
Yeah.
you got the
Baloch, yeah.
You know,
Yeah. I'm speaking to a friend in Pakistan. Exactly. And, you know, I think one reason why the Shah's regime was so brutal, as was the Assad regime and Saddam Hussein's regimes, it's because they needed that iron fist to hold all these peoples together. And so that's iron fist is not present in Yemen. But as you say, if that happens in Iran, you know, nobody is going to care about what's happening in Yemen at all, because
So as a former diplomat and as someone who was part of the National Security Council at the White House, do you think that a U.S. attack on Iran, or an attempt in a way to have some kind of regime change, or to try and, you know, exploit the ethno-linguistic fissures right now, you think that redounds to the U.S.'s advantage, or just simply to Israel's advantage, which in any way wants chaos in the region?
Definitely it redounds to Israel's advantage, but it redounds to the advantage of the regime, because it then makes it true that all these protesters on the street are traitors. And then but I mean, they're not traitors, but I mean, you know, it makes it easier to make that argument. And then that makes it impossible for the thing that really has to happen to occur if there's going to be real change in Iran. And that is that the members of the IRGC and the military see that the regime is a failure, is collapsing, and then they decide to save their own skin by changing sides. If that doesn't happen, there's no peaceful or positive outcome for Iran. So if the US just uses military force, it makes it more difficult to get to that point, unless, you know, there's some magical Venezuela-like, you know, outcome where they're able to parachute in, and it's impossible in Iran. It's not possible. Yeah. So I think it's I would, in those policy discussions that I used to participate in or lead, I would fought like hell against the military option in Iran.
Absolutely. I mean, frankly, I mean, it is, you know, if that happens, the jig is up, and we just go into those Rumsfeldian unknowns.
Totally agree.
But thank you so much, Ambassador Bryza, for your insights. This is all from this episode. If you like the discussion, do click on the subscribe button and give us feedback. Until our next episode, goodbye and stay safe.